kwxk.
So you've likely come across online hair loss forums where users claim that switching from Finasteride to Dutasteride resulted in hair loss. They often attribute their excessive scalp hair loss directly due to Dutasteride. Consequently, many conclude, perhaps prematurely, that Dutasteride doesn't work, especially for them. Various theories are proposed for this phenomenon, ranging from genetic explanations to myths like reflex hyperandrogenicity. This mythical condition, that is, posits that when there's a decrease in DHT or a blockage of androgen receptors in the scalp, more androgen receptors are suddenly produced, leading to an increase in DHT sensitivity, and also hair follicles suddenly become sensitive to testosterone as well. I've debunked this in a video titled, quote, Scalp Testosterone versus Scalp DHT, so I won't delve into that here. In this video, I'm approaching the topic from a somewhat different perspective. I'll be delving into the clinical literature about Dutasteride, specifically its pharmacokinetics in serum and its effects on the scalp DHT. Additionally, we'll touch on the concept of synchronized shedding linked to Finasteride and presumably to Dutasteride as well, and how an even greater degree of this synchronized shedding may occur with Dutasteride. To provide a quick summary, due to Dutasteride extended half-life, it requires several doses to achieve and maintain a steady concentration in the blood that effectively reduces DHT. Typically, for a 0.5 milligram dose, it could take up to 1 to 3 months for Dutasteride to start consistently suppressing DHT in both scalp and serum. For instance, in the Phase 2 Olson et al. Dutasteride clinical study titled, quote, The Importance of Dual 5-alpha reductase inhibition in the Treatment of Male Pattern Hair Loss, Results of a Randomized Placebo-Controlled Study of Dutasteride versus Finasteride, unquote, we see that after 6 weeks or 42 days of consistent oral Dutasteride use in gelatin capsules at 0.1 milligram, 0.5 milligram, and 2.5 milligram, serum DHT declined by 75%, 92%, and 96% respectively. In another study titled, quote, The Pharmacokinetic Modeling of Dutasteride, a Compound with Parallel Linear and Nonlinear Elimination, unquote, by Gislinkog et al., a cohort of 32 male healthy participants was employed in a randomized single-blind parallel group study. The administration of Dutasteride ranged from 0.01 to 40 milligrams, presented as a powder in water. Gislinkog et al. Found that both a daily dose of 2.5 milligram for 28 days or a loading dose of 40 milligram followed by a daily dose of 2.5 milligram brought serum DHT down faster in about 28 days than the typical 0.5 milligram use did, which took around 3 months for some individuals in the study. So this should essentially answer the question for those who ask me, hey, KWX, how frequent should I be using Dutasteride and at what dose? And something to consider here is that you want to make sure that Dutasteride is present in your serum. So this means using it frequently every day or every other day, or as frequently as you can, and using it at a dose between its effective 0.5 milligram daily dose up to 2.5 milligram daily dose is better than using it infrequently, or infrequently at varying doses. Now, over time, it will build up in your system, but if you're using it like once every week or twice a week, or you're using it in a wishy-washy kind of way, you're not going to have that steady presence in your bloodstream, and you could be delaying that sort of time frame that it will take to bring down the DHT in your serum and your scalp. So it's better to just consistently use something like 0.5 milligrams a day or every other day, or use 2.5 milligrams every other day or a day, or use something like Finasteride 1 milligram for 5 days out of the week, and then couple that with Dutasteride for 2 days out of the week. Something like that. Those are the dosing protocols. We know that doses ranging from 0.5 milligram to 2.5 milligram can lead to a 92 to 96% reduction in serum DHT and a 50% to 80% decrease in scalp DHT. Now, if one hastily switches from Finasteride to Dutasteride, especially when using Dutasteride at 0.5 milligrams daily, there might be a gap in achieving optimal DHT suppression. This gap poses a theoretical risk of a temporary spike in DHT levels, potentially triggering shedding. Now, Finasteride works faster than Dutasteride does.
So this is me in post-production. Allow me to clarify here. What I mean to say is that Finasteride at either 1 milligram or 5 milligram works faster than Dutasteride at 0.5 milligrams. Now, that's not to say that Finasteride will lower DHT by the same degree as Dutasteride does. It's just that due to things like its half-life dynamics and other pharmacokinetic principles, Finasteride works faster, so to speak, in suppressing DHT than Dutasteride does. Also, there's a factor of Finasteride staying in the hair follicle for a period of time, but in any case, if we're just looking at the evidence right now, upon discontinuing Finasteride, it'll take around 5 days to up to 14 days for baseline DHT levels to go back up again. So I just want to put that in there. Forgot to clarify, but yeah, I'll leave it at that.
And when you stop using Finasteride, your body rebounds the 5-alpha reductase. I think it's around 5 days after you stop using it. So we have to be careful here, because if you do this for about 3 months and Dutasteride hasn't sufficiently suppressed your scalp DHT, and I think it would take longer for, this is my opinion here, but I'm pretty sure it takes longer for scalp DHT to decrease versus serum DHT, right? So in the time you left Finasteride and you have this drug Dutasteride that you need to take frequently and it takes longer for its effects to show, in the background where all this is happening, that scalp DHT could be going back up. And for this reason, shedding may intensify until Dutasteride reaches optimal blood concentrations and then swiftly reduces that scalp DHT by anywhere between 50 to 80% depending on what dose of Dutasteride you're using. Now, this sudden reduction can make hair follicles, once again, that are, the ones that are sensitive to DHT, they can kind of reset, resulting in a synchronized growth pattern. So you're kind of getting hit with a double whammy here. You're shedding because once you switch from Finasteride to Dutasteride, because Dutasteride takes longer for its effects to show in terms of its suppression of serum and scalp DHT, that background DHT went up, and theoretically, your hair follicles could have kind of been disrupted in their growth pattern, causing them to shed. And then also, just by using a stronger 5-alpha reductase inhibitor like Dutasteride, you're going to be decreasing more scalp DHT, so you're probably even inducing a secondary shed on top of that initial shed from the switch between Finasteride to Dutasteride. So it's kind of destructive. This is why it's not a good idea to suddenly hop off Finasteride and switch immediately to Dutasteride. It's probably better that you kind of transitioned the Dutasteride in over time. So what does that look like? That could look like using, again, like I said before, 1 milligram oral Finasteride for 5 days out of the week and using 0.5 milligrams Dutasteride for 2 days out of the week. So from Monday to Friday using that 1 milligram oral Finasteride, and then Saturday and Sunday 0.5 milligram oral Dutasteride in those days, respectively. And we get our understanding about the Finasteride synchronized shed. Kind of want to go back to this so people can understand this, but we get our understanding about the Finasteride synchronized shed from the early research done by Finasteride. I think it was the 5-year follow-up review by Kaufman, but I'll put that on the screen. And if you haven't already, you guys should go check out my video that I did. I think it's titled Synchronized Finasteride Shed. It takes 2 to 5 years or something like that for Finasteride to really work, something like that.
After the initial improvement in hair growth, some individuals may experience a shedding period. This occurs because the hairs that entered the anagen phase together during Finasteride treatment reach the end of their hair growth cycles, and enter the telogen phase in a partially synchronized manner. As a result, these hairs shed simultaneously, leading to a temporary decline in hair count. However, don't worry, this shedding period is typically temporary. As subsequent hair growth cycles occur, the hairs lose their synchronized characteristic and become more independent in their hair growth cycles. And then eventually there's this normalization period over time, leading to sustained increase in hair count at a plateau above baseline.
But in short, just to reiterate again, when you take out a substantial amount of scalp DHT, the hair follicles that start growing again, they all kind of like start growing in the same sort of synchronized pattern. They grow at the same time. So this means when it's time for them to shed, right, for them to reset and go into a greater anagen growth phase, they'll kind of do it at the same time. And this can be really jarring because depending on at what stage your hair cycle is currently in, that could mean that you could get a minimal shed somewhere down along the line, or you could get a pretty big shed to the point where it looks like Finasteride stopped working. Now, if that happens with Finasteride, imagine what that could, essentially manifest with Dutasteride. It will probably look horrible, right? It probably look like you've gone to shit. And for some people, this is where I, personally, I think this is where the whole like Dutasteride destroyed my scalp, destroyed my hair thing comes into play, because you have to ask the question, how do they switch from Finasteride to Dutasteride? And you have to also consider that depending on the dose of Dutasteride that they used, you're bringing down scalp DHT by a substantial amount. So that could really affect the intricate scalp environment of these hair follicles. But again, I want to return back to that paper that I mentioned earlier, the Per-Olsen-Gistenkog paper that follows the pharmacokinetic modeling of Dutasteride. So we saw that 32 healthy male participants were administered Dutasteride between the ranges of 0.01 milligram to 40 milligram, and it was presented in a powder in water. Now, strict measures were enforced concerning the intake of other medications, alcohol, caffeine, and tobacco. Blood samples were collected at numerous intervals, and serum was stored at a very low temperature for analysis. The levels of Dutasteride in these samples were evaluated using a specific LC-MS assay, so in simpler terms, they used a specific scientific tool to see how much Dutasteride was in the samples. Now, a specific challenge that was faced during the research was the long-expected half-life of Dutasteride, which necessitated a parallel group design. Combining data from various participants for a complete dose range analysis posed difficulties as well, again due to that long half-life. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this earlier in this video, but Dutasteride has a pretty long half-life. It's around 3 weeks, I think 5 weeks, maybe 3 to 5 weeks. In comparison, just to give you an idea, Finasteride's half-life is between 6 to 8 hours. So it's pretty significant in terms of their difference. When the researchers looked at how Dutasteride behaved in different people, they noticed that it didn't act the same way in everyone, and this is expected because in reality, people can respond differently to the same drug due to factors like genetics, metabolism, and other individual characteristics. So the rate at which Dutasteride is broken down and suppresses DHT can vary between individuals. Researchers employed a technique known as a nonlinear mixed effect model for their study. They had two main objectives in using this method. Firstly, they aimed to identify the common or average response of all participants in the study. You can think of this as being similar to determining the average height in a classroom of children. Second, they were interested in understanding how individuals and their reactions might deviate from this average response. So again, this is analogous to noticing that in that same classroom of children, not every child will have the same average height. Some people will be taller than others, and others will be shorter. So you will have people that are taller than the average height, and you will have people that are shorter than the average height. In essence, through their research, these researchers wanted to discern both the general trend and the unique variations in how people responded to Dutasteride. And they used tools like non-Mammon and PredPP, which are specialized computer programs that help crunch these complex numbers and patterns. After the number crunching, they used another tool called Expose and SAS to create visual aids like graphs so they could easily see and interpret the patterns in the data. In simple terms, the researchers used advanced tools to understand both the common and unique ways men may potentially respond to dutasteride. Interestingly, the results indicated a low serum clearance and a high volume of distribution for dutasteride, similar findings to animal studies. Due to the lack of an intravenous dose given to humans, the bioavailability of dutasteride in humans, at this point in time at least, remained undetermined in this study. So this study doesn't completely reflect the pharmacokinetics in something like a dutasteride gel capsule or a powder pill. If dutasteride was injected directly into the bloodstream, that may be a closer result to the oral gelatin pill. In this case, dutasteride was mixed into a 240 milliliter water solution as a fine powder. So really, they just mixed dutasteride powder with water at varying doses. The research suggested that several potential reasons of the observed nonlinearity in the pharmacokinetics of dutasteride, including a low-capacity metabolic pathway, saturable biliary excretion, or irreversible binding of dutasteride with 5-alpha reductase. However, even with the nonlinear elimination observed, a linear elimination pathway ensures that there won't be unlimited accumulation of the drug. So they created some simulations that suggested that nonlinear pathways contribute less to the elimination at doses greater than or equal to 1.5 milligram a day, with up to 3 months of dosing required to achieve a near steady state concentration. The study also discussed the potential benefits of loading the dose rapidly to achieve this steady state concentration of dutasteride. And remember, to have a steady state concentration, it means you have a steady presence in the body. And with the steady presence, you can have a consistent suppression of DHT. So in other words, the drug doesn't just leave the body in one simple way. It has a couple of different routes, but there's a standard path that makes sure that the drug doesn't keep building up forever in the system. When taking higher doses, like anything more than 1.5 milligram daily, the drug mostly follows a standard route. Without doing anything special, say using a typical 0.5 milligram daily dose of dutasteride, it might take up to 3 months, 1 to 3 months rather, for the drug to stabilize in the body and sufficiently suppress DHT. But the researchers thought that using a bigger starting dose can speed up this process and reach a stable state faster. So the research suggested that by the end of the treatment, the drug could reduce DHT levels in the body better than finasteride. The study had a few drawbacks. One of the main ones was that it only involved a small group of people, so they couldn't see how different types of people, whether men of a significantly older age range or different race, or perhaps other sort of idiosyncrasies, would react differently to the drug. But there's no reason to believe that they would. But in the end, they found out that while the drug, dutasteride being the drug, can work in 2 different ways in the body, when taken in daily doses higher than 1 milligram, it mainly follows a straightforward, predictable path. So the body processes and gets rid of the drug in a steady and expected way. So through excretion in urine or stool or poo-poo, shit. Sorry for being immature. So here we're coming with the idea that at the very least, we need 0.5 milligrams daily. You need to do that daily. But it varies between people. Some people can reach that steady state of DHT suppression. And the only way to do something that's predictable, at least based on the simulation from the study, is that if you take anything 1 milligram of dutasteride and above, up to 2.5 milligram of dutasteride, you can get a quicker reduction in serum DHT just due to the overall presence of dutasteride in the body. So once, let's say, every milligram starts acting and starts to break down to suppress 5-alpha reductase in the body, because you have such an overwhelming presence of it already, you'll be able to reach that steady state, that sort of early and consistent suppression of DHT. So you might be walking away with, okay, so now what do I do, right? This is just my opinion, because I don't think people have talked about dutasteride loading phases yet, at least on YouTube. But I would say that for me, 1 milligram oral finasteride 5 days a week and 0.5 milligrams dutasteride 2 days a week, and you slowly I guess you can say, introduce more dutasteride as the time progresses. So you can either choose to kind of shift the scales, so maybe solely progress to taking 0.5 milligrams dutasteride daily, or increase those twice a week uses of dutasteride from either 0.5 milligrams of dutasteride to 2.5 milligrams dutasteride twice a week. The other solution, as in the GIST-NCOG study, would be to use 2.5 milligrams dutasteride daily to see that suppression of serum DHT earlier in about 30 days. So that's the protocol, I guess you can say, the dutasteride loading phase protocol. And there are some people that I know from my community, from my Discord server, who actually do loading phases of dutasteride. And there are some people who just take the typical 0.5 milligram daily dose of dutasteride. But what I would say, and again, not a doctor here, what I would say is it's probably better to just stick to the 0.5 milligram daily dose and over time taper up to the 2.5 milligram daily dose if you want to just have that reassurance in terms of scalp DHT suppression being 80% versus the 0.5 milligram scalp DHT suppression of about 50%. But yeah, I've been rambling on for way too long. Hopefully it's been clear, and I'll put the links to that study in the description for you guys to check out. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Peace out.